Hello, I'm Sandra Geyer. I'm a soprano singer, broadcast presenter and braille music teacher, and a very warm welcome to episode 5 of our Journey Through Braille Music series. In 6 episodes, we're revealing what braille music is all about. And in the previous episode, we looked back to some basic braille music signs, not forgetting vocal music, in episode 3. We then turned to music for keyboard with new signs and a different layout. And we're now going to explore advanced topics. And I'm joined by Melanie Wren. Hello, Melanie.
Hello.
If you've just joined us, Melanie, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm the lead transcription executive for music at RNIB. My job is to take printed scores of all kinds and convert or transcribe them into braille. I learnt recorder, clarinet and piano at school, but being particularly poor at controlling my nerves, I was delighted to find a job where I could use my music theory knowledge instead.
Now, Melanie, I'm sure listeners will be interested to know how you found your way into this area of work.
Well, I was coming to the end of my degree course, and on reading the local paper one day, I happened upon an RNIB job vacancy for a braille transcriber and specialising in music. I'd never even heard of braille music at that time, but I applied and got the job, and I started the day after I graduated 22 years ago. I was very lucky.
Well, life is certainly full of surprises. Could you say what we're going to talk about during this episode?
Yes, we're going to explore music for strings, wind and percussion, examination material and orchestral and graphic scores.
Right, let's begin by considering music for stringed instruments and what it is possible to transcribe.
Well, as a general point, there are signs in print unique to specific types of instruments, and all of these have their equivalent signs in braille music. For bowed-stringed instruments, such as violin and cello, for example, braille has signs for the up and down bow cymbals and both natural and artificial harmonics.
And are there other braille signs specific for stringed instruments?
Yes. In print, where there are indications given for which string a player should use, braille has string signs, which are made up of a prefix followed by a sign unique to each string. Also, where print uses numerals above the stave to tell a string player which fret or position on the string is required, these are represented in braille with signs based on intervals mentioned in earlier episodes. A fourth position sign, for example, is made up of a prefix followed by the fourth interval sign.
Having covered music for strings, are there particular features for wind music?
Breath marks are commonly found in wind music, and braille has 2 different signs for these, depending on whether a full or a half breath is indicated in the print. More exclusive to wind music are signs to add or remove a mute, and these also have their braille music equivalents.
Yes, and they appear in vocal music sometimes as well when the editor has decided to add a rest or a breath mark where there hasn't been before. So how do you deal with aspects of grouping and beaming found in stave notation?
Well, stave notation uses beams to link the stems of smaller value notes to form beats or portions of beats. Braille notes don't have stems, and therefore this grouping has to be represented in another way. Quavers, grouped together by one beam in print music, are not grouped in braille, but notes of smaller value can be grouped. We've seen already that lower dots of a braille note indicate its value. To show print's grouping, the first note is written using its true value, that is with its lower dots, and the remaining notes in the group are simply written as quavers.
And are there any other ways to show print's beaming in the braille?
Yes, there are occasions where print music has notes beamed across a bar line, and here braille uses a different method to represent the note grouping by using a sign which goes at the beginning and the end of the group.
Stave notation has evolved over many years with composers using different types of notation. Are you able to represent these in braille?
Yes, where possible, standard braille notation would be used, and for the vast majority of music this is possible. There are many signs found more commonly in modern music, which have equivalent signs in braille, and some examples of these are found in the music heard at the start of this podcast, such as X-shaped, diamond-shaped, and triangle-shaped note heads. In this piece, the composer has used asterisks to tell the performer how these notes should be played. Tap key, for example, heard in the great bass recorder part in the opening 3 bars. Graphic scores require more ingenuity, and where braille music signs aren't available, these will be devised by the transcriber and an explanation will be given.
That's interesting actually, because I've never come across a braille graphic score. I've only ever come across tactile representations, so literally a tactile stave of a graphic score, so I'll have to seek one out after this recording. So what happens in braille music where spatial elements are used in the print?
In these cases, the transcriber might give a description of the score.
Moving on to exams, is there much call for these to be transcribed?
Very much so. When we're transcribing exams, consideration has to be given to reproducing the print accurately and clearly. Like print exams, each one has a standard layout to give consistency from year to year, and there are established methods for achieving this.
Are standard braille music layouts used for examples in exams then?
The layout of musical extracts in exams does differ slightly to the norm. For example, bar numbers are given on a free line above every bar for ease of reference.
And are there any other elements present in an exam score which you wouldn't normally find in a piece of braille music?
There are a few, yes. Musical extracts often have labels above or below the stave, linking the music to the question. Perhaps a figure 1 at a specific point to indicate that question 1 refers to this bar, or possibly a letter K where the key needs to be identified. In the braille, these labels are placed within the music, and any brackets in the print enclosing these sections are also included.
And what happens in braille if a question requires the candidate to fill in missing items in an extract from a listening paper?
In this situation, the student would describe the information or write out the music between the points illustrated in the question.
Are there any other signs we haven't yet covered which might feature in a music exam?
One area which can arise in music theory exams is figured bass, when numbers, accidentals and other signs appear below the stave in columns. In braille, there are ways of representing these signs too.
And orchestral scores? They come in many different shapes and sizes in print. Can these be transcribed?
They can. These are represented in braille in what we call full score layout. Each instrument is presented one below the other, with the start of each new bar for each instrument aligned, just as you'd find in a print score. All instruments forming the complete ensemble are listed at the beginning of the work, even those that are resting. But after this point, instruments drop in and out as and when they're playing. You can often only get a couple of bars per line in this layout, and not many systems to the page, so these scores can quickly become large, turning into a considerable number of volumes.
I have to second that, having one or two fall on me once or twice. Is there anything you need to watch out for when transcribing this type of music into braille?
There are quite a few things that can transcribe up in this, yes. You have to pay very careful attention to changes of clef between instruments. Where different staves need to be read in different clefs, the transcriber must be on the ball as they're switching from one instrument to another. Similarly, you need to be aware of whether you are reading any chords or intervals upwards or downwards, as this can vary between instruments too.
Are there any other considerations?
Well, one thing that does commonly occur in this layout is the combining of transposing and non-transposing instruments, and the resulting use of different key signatures.
And turning to another group of instruments, have you had any experience of transcribing material for percussion?
I have, yes.
And does that kind of transcription differ from those already mentioned?
Well, it can do. It depends how it's presented in the print. Melodic percussion instruments, such as xylophones or marimbas, are just presented in the usual way. For unpitched percussion instruments, print sometimes uses a single-line stave. These notes are assigned a note name in the braille and given within bars, along with their note value and alongside an explanation.
And how would music for a drum kit be presented?
In print, this often appears on one 5-line stave. Although these instruments are unpitched, their position on the stave gives us arbitrary pitches we can use in the braille, again accompanied by an explanation.
And are there any other signs which come to mind which you would like to touch upon?
Yes, I mentioned earlier that braille notes don't have stems, but braille music does have a way of representing unpitched rhythmic notation, as you would see most commonly in metronome markings at the start of a piece. These are called stem signs in the braille, and each note value has its own unique 2-cell sign.
Now, if listeners want to find out more, what resources are available?
I would direct anybody who wanted to explore the subject further to the new International Manual of Braille Music Notation, and this can be downloaded from the UCAF website. There's also another useful document on the UCAF website music page called Braille Music and Unified English Braille, and that's reference B017.
Very useful to have that reference number. And as we round off this podcast episode, could you briefly summarise the main points we covered?
Well, I think the main point that I hope comes across is that there are no limits to what can be represented in braille music. It has specific signs for particular groups of instruments, such as strings, wind and percussion. It can replicate a full orchestral score, an exam, even a modern graphic score. If the music can be represented in print form, then it can also be represented in braille.
Great. Can I just second, third and fourth that? Thank you very, very much, Melanie. In the next and last episode, we will summarise what we've learnt so far and talk about available resources for learning, teaching and producing braille music.